G-Core CDN is a next-generation content delivery network that accelerates your application's static and dynamic content. G-Core CDN has you covered around the globe with more than 150 edge locations and 11,000 peering partners worldwide. And of course, G-Core CDN supports IPv4 and IPv6. Go to gcore.com/packetpushers to find out more. That's gcore.com/packetpushers.
Packet Pushers.
Hello, welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today, I am thrilled to introduce an extraordinary guest who is not just a network engineer, but an inspiring force within the network engineering community. Lexie Cooper is a mentor and a motivator who helps countless professionals excel in their careers. I think Lexie has this incredible knack for making complex networking concepts and boring everyday tasks accessible, engaging, and sometimes even funny. And we know it's a really tall order, as some of us in networking already know. So today we'll be talking to Lexie about various topics, but we'll try to focus on space networking. So let's get to it. Hello, Lexie. How are you?
Hey, Eric, you make me sound so much cooler than I actually am. I really appreciate the introduction. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. And as we were chatting off the mic, it's already 30 minutes past the time we actually both logged on and hit the record button. So I'm looking forward to all the things that we could talk about and, kind of pick your brain a little bit about the cool projects that you're working on. So Lexie, I know you've been on Packet Pusher a number of times, and you were also the co-host for A1 Networking, the Art of Network Engineering. So people who follow you online should be pretty familiar with your work, especially if you have gone through the Packet Pusher episode, knowing a little bit about your background. But why don't you give us a 30-second version of your background, how you got into this cool position that you're in?
I'm a network integration engineer. That's my official title right now. I started out as just, a network engineer in a NOC for an ISP, got experience there. And then a few years later, I was lucky enough to land this position. In my current position, I work for Blue Origin, and we're currently building a heavy lift launch vehicle called New Glenn. And the network that I implement and maintain and integrate is the network on that vehicle, New Glenn. So it's like a closed loop system. It's very different than any other networking that I've ever known or done. So it's been a trip. I've been there for about 2.5 years now.
Oh, wow. Has it been 2.5 years?
I know. Time has flown. I feel like just yesterday I started this job and I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this now.
Okay, so that kind of leads me to this next question, because I think when you did the Packet Pusher episode previously on heavy networking, you were 8 months into the job. And so, you talked about some of the things, some of the challenges you had. And I want to quote, say, kind of managing ego, if you will, but, just kind of getting onboarded, right?
Yeah.
And getting, kind of comfortable with your team. So what has changed? And I guess, what are some of the lessons that you continue to learn on the job since then?
Oh man, I forgot I talked about managing egos on that episode.
Truth be told, everybody does that, right? So I just started a job 6 months ago. And if you say other people don't have an ego, that's a lie. And I have an ego too. And my egos are usually bruised easily. So everybody have to manage expectations. Let's just put it that way. So what has been the experience that you've had since that episode?
That's very true. Things have changed quite a bit for me, actually, since, I'm not going to lie, the first full year working here was an enormous challenge. At times, I didn't think I was going to make it or that I was cut out for it. And nothing against the company. It's just that aerospace is different than an ISP, a NOC environment, which is where I came from. I was used to a certain kind of pressure in the NOC, for sure. You get Sev 1s, you're on call sometimes, things like that. But the kind of pressure, I worked out of tickets in the NOC, and I don't feel like I had to, quote unquote, manage egos so much. And actually, my soft skills, which I thought were pretty good when I was working there, my soft skills were really tested quite a bit once I moved over to aerospace, because I'm working with a lot of other engineers, right?
Who are at the top of their games.
Yes, some of the best engineers in the world, and they know it, right?
Right.
Nothing wrong with that, but most of the time not. But sometimes you get some pretty big egos there, and you have to figure out how to deal with that. And then there's, the extra element of being a woman, and
Yeah.
sometimes that comes into play. Sometimes it doesn't. It just depends, right? And so in my first year, I had a huge sort of culture shock there where I'm dealing with not only a ton of other engineers all the time, and I constantly am having to like socialize with them and like talk with them and learn from them, but not bother them too much and all that kind of stuff. But I'm also, learning how to deal with is the wrong way to say it, but it's just what came out of my mouth. But like learning how to work collaboratively with
Right.
other engineers that are not network engineers. But to put it kindly, they're all very, very intelligent people, and they're used to understanding and knowing everything pretty much. And so when you bring network engineering into it, sometimes folks think they know, or they're like used to knowing, but they're actually not correct all the time. How do you tell a world-class engineer like that's not what a VLAN is? Like they're not stupid, right? They're just experts in their field, and they
Right.
obviously haven't like spent a ton of time studying network engineering, because why would they? They're aerospace engineers or electrical engineers or whatever. So, for me, this little old like bachelor's degree in English lit like girl coming in, I shouldn't call myself a girl, right? But that's how sometimes you're seen.
Right.
Coming in and being like, that's not actually how it works. I had to figure out how to say that nicer, because I was used to the knock, honestly, when all of us had a similar level of knowledge about network engineering, and it was kind of rough and like brisk, the way we talk to each other, because we all sort of were on the same page. I had to learn to tone that down, and I may or may not have been successful at that. I some days I think I was not successful at toning that down at all, still 2.5 years into it. But I did have to learn how to integrate not just like a network, but like integrate with other people with different knowledge and skills than me, and that was a challenge.
I feel like we could talk a whole episode on this, but I just saw your video this morning, and I think you phrase it as medium skill. So
Yeah,
somewhere between
medium
hard
firm
skill and soft, and that's how you like your mattress, and that's how you like your work environment. So tell us your philosophy for medium skill.
We hear a lot now. Like, I think every podcast, every person in tech who's a creator, every single piece of media talking about working in tech will talk about soft skills and hard skills and the
Right.
difference between them and how they're important and when they're important and things like that. None of that is incorrect, but I've come to learn, at least from my experience, you can't just divide them into this binary, like, here's your hard skills over here, here's your soft skills over here. And like, if you need to work on one, then you just work on that one, right? It's more like you have to integrate them together. You have to,
Right.
they mesh. In the real world, they really mesh. They're not separate. And so, for me, it was like, okay, I know my stuff when it comes to network engineering.
Right.
I don't know how to convey that. First of all, how to convey, yes, I am a SME in this particular area.
Right.
And also, like, I'm not telling you this to call you stupid. I just am telling you this because I do know better than you. I'm sorry. I know what I'm talking about, and I need you to listen to me. Right. That is maybe the biggest challenge that I've ever had in a workplace environment, believe it or not. And I'm still struggling with it a bit, but it's a work in progress. So you have to, take your hard skills and be able to convey them in a soft way. And to me, that's medium. I think I talk in that video a little bit about like, you can sit in front of a camera and it's easy to like just sort of rattle on about technical stuff or about things that would be considered more soft skills, like how to interview or whatever, right? But it's easy to do that because you've practiced beforehand and you just go on camera and you recite your script, right?
Yeah.
But what happens when you're like in an interview and the interviewer is not just looking for hard skills now, they're not just looking for soft skills, they're looking for both. That's where I think like you conveying your hard skills in a confident manner, in a way that is, soft, right?
Yep.
Is extremely important. It's not the only place, right? Like in the workplace, it's also important. But yeah, like the first use case for that, I guess, for me thinking about it was in an interview, you have to be medium.
Okay, I feel like we have to release this episode ASAP because I think trademarks are first use, right? So it's like you got to trademark that medium skill so that, TR.
I wish there was something catchier to like call it, but
It doesn't need to be catchy, right? It needs to be right and it needs to be useful. So you heard it here first, right? If somebody else start using it, we should like I don't know, blockchain it, and then like people will attribute the origin to you or something like that.
My medium skill NFT.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? Actually, come to speak of it, I mean, you already published that video. So that's first used and then it's out there.
Oh.
My prediction, previously when blockchain was super hot, was that every tweet and every LinkedIn post would be kind of blockchained and assigned like a unique hash so that people know the origin of it. Otherwise, just you can't attribute it correctly.
That would have been much better of a use for it than like NFTs. But I guess NFTs are sort of using that sort of same, I don't know, philosophy as well.
Correct. But they're just using it for like coins or something, right? Like, or for, I don't know, crazy monkey heads.
The apes. Oh my God. Anyway, you heard it here first, right?
Well, you heard it on LinkedIn first, but you heard it here second, which reinforces that was where I heard it from. So I'll be like the first lineage of that usage, I suppose.
Thanks, Eric. I always thought that soft skills and the hard skills felt a little bit that sort of dichotomy that we preach to people.
Right.
Makes sense, but it's one of those things that suffers like in, sorry to do this, but like in feminism, this is the first like example that I can think of to draw like a parallel. In feminism, you talk about all these different subjects in feminism, but then you talk about this concept of intersectionality where, maybe like race or class or gender or whatever, like they all sort of come together and they influence each other. Same thing here. Soft skills, hard skills. It's not just about you being a genius at your job. It's also, are you not a jerk to your coworkers?
Right.
Like that also matters as far as like whether or not you can keep your job and if you're a good fit for that job, right? So it's the same kind of concept, right? Everything influences each other. So having this dichotomy, I always felt was a little bit lacking.
I agree. It's not black and white. Like, I don't think anything in this world are black and white. Like the closest binary event I could think of are sports events. But at the same time, the other team, they might have traveled like 3,000 miles and they might be injured or, like fans were like waking them up at 2 a.m. in the morning at the hotel or like whatever it is, right? Like, so even a seemingly black and white result could be interpreted as a bunch of gray area. So I think what you talked about on managing contacts, managing relationship leads really well into my next question, because I know you just traveled to Cisco Live US in Vegas, which is why you're under the weather a little bit, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Cisco Live.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for 2,000 of your closest friends all sitting in the conference together.
Breathing on me all the time.
Looking at that Elton John. Oh my God. Like my LinkedIn was just like all Elton John all the time for that 1 hour or 2 hours. But my question is, when you were there, I think a lot of people were giving you props for how the Cisco Live communication have evolved. And you were being one of the few are saying effective communicator on, technology and messages and, just branding. So what is your thought about that? Is it a deliberate practice thing for you to actually think about how the message is being crafted?
A little bit.
Okay.
When I first started, I don't want to ramble too much about this, right? Because I try to avoid saying like that I think I'm this great, amazing like influencer or whatever. I'm a very bad influencer, honestly. When I first started on social media as like a network engineering presence, I was just on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And Twitter was so easy for me. It just kind of came naturally to be like silly and goofy and funny about it, because I didn't have to like put on makeup and like find a meme and then like, act out the meme, like that's all stuff that you have to do on TikTok or whatever. But just tweeting something from my bed, I could just be like goofy and funny about network engineering. And that's all I wanted to do in the beginning. And that's really all I still kind of want to do now, even though it's evolved a bit. People talk about like, we have some issues in the network engineering sort of career field that a lot of people are concerned about. In particular, one of those is like, obviously we have very few women still, but we also have, I've heard a lot of people talk about, especially after being at Cisco Live this year, the average age, I guess, of the attendees is like increasing, right? We don't have a ton of young people going into network engineering.
Right.
There's always these questions about why and stuff.
At least going to Cisco Live.
Yeah, okay, fair. Yes, at least going to Cisco Live for sure.
Right.
And there's a lot of different things that could be causing that, right? But in the beginning and still now, I just really like network engineering and the way that I didn't see any jokes about it. I thought it was a little too serious and a little too dusty, and I was having a hard time. Yeah, right. It's very dusty still, and like I was having a hard time in particular studying for the CCMP. Like rote memorization, I hate it. It was killing me. And
Mhm.
like all the stuff I had to memorize, I remember about BGP. I was just like, I hate that. Like I love network engineering, but I hate this, right?
Yeah.
Like I love knowing these things. I don't like sitting staring at a book learning them. So I just started making jokes about that, and it turned into something that like a lot of people could relate to. And when people start like hailing me sometimes as like, oh, this amazing communicator, like she's like doing something new, I think a lot of people would have done what I did and what I'm still trying to do. And some of my like other friends who are network engineer influencers as well, like I think a lot of people would do it. It's just we still don't have a lot of young people who are motivated to do it that way. And we have a lot of people, I think, in the community that are extremely serious about it. Nothing against that, but they take themselves after a while extremely seriously.
Right.
And I don't know, I think we have a lot of room for just like calming down and joking about a lot of stuff. We should, because that's the only way we stay sane, all of us as a collective. And also, that's how we attract more younger people to the career field. I have a lot of thoughts on this, honestly, because I get asked it a lot. How do we get more women, more young people into network engineering? And there's just so many things that go into it. But I think a lot of what it comes down to is like making the career field attractive to people. And there's a few things that go into that, like salary, average salary, pretty good. Is it interesting and sexy? Well, not as much as cybersecurity, but it's still pretty cool when you get down to it. Is it dusty and boring? And is everybody in this career field like old and annoying and takes themselves too seriously?
Yeah.
We're not doing great on that third one, right?
Yeah.
So that's, I came into it wanting to change that, at least for myself. I like making myself laugh. And turns out a lot of other people like laughing too. So
I mean, it takes guts, right? Like it really takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there, put your face out there. I, for one, hides behind like memes and funny jokes, XYZ comic strips, and just like voice my opinion through these channels. But it does take a lot of courage to just put your face out there and share your opinion. So yes, I know it's not bridge gap protocol, but I just wanted, say it to get a few laughs, right? So I agree 120%. In fact, this morning, and this is not rehearsed, right? Like you don't know what I'm about to say, but like this morning, I actually went and looked for kind of a comic book, like an anime book that Confluent published about Kafka, just making Kafka more fun, right? Kafka is a very quote unquote hard technology, very difficult to understand. But they actually published a comic book about it, right? Like a animated
Aw.
series about it. And so I dug that out, and then I sent it to my work email intended on this coming Monday to forward it to other people and say, dude, like network automation could be so cool, could be so fun. And, my idea, I don't want to, announce it prematurely, but my idea is just to make network automation fun. And it's not even, again, just making automation fun and digestible. And who cares if it's on TikTok? If you get a little bit out of it, then so be it.
Yeah, that's 100% the right philosophy, in my opinion. I love that there's a comic book about it. See, you're right. That's what should be done, right? Like, we need more perspectives than just the like typical dusty stuff, right? Obviously, learning it is important. You don't want to just joke about it. I think a lot
Right.
of these people who take it a bit too seriously think that, making jokes about things means you're not learning it, but that's
Right.
the opposite, right? So a lot of us learn better when we think it's funny. Right? Because we'll remember it. And the more different ways you approach learning a thing, the better you're going to learn it, I think. And so I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah, I agree. And the reason I ask that is because I do think people are learning differently. If you look at the readership of books, it's consistently going down. I think people are still consuming content, even more so than ever, but they're just not reading books. So how do you get to a point where, people could still digest and be useful and be helpful to help them learn and grow, but at the same time, don't present them with these things that would put them to sleep in like 2 seconds?
One thing that I wish, if money weren't a problem, right? And I could still do whatever I wanted and it didn't involve like a 9 to 5 day job, I think I would seriously look into YouTube deep technical dives, but animated ones,
Mhm.
right? Actually, the most successful, like truly educational content out there right now are YouTube channels with millions and millions of followers that animate and make jokes about educational subjects.
Right.
They're so successful, and people do learn from them because they're talking about science, or they're talking about tech, or they're talking about history, but they're doing it in a different way that captures the attention of a society that increasingly today, we're all learning that we're neurodivergent in different ways. And I know like the dusty crowd is like, oh, well, you're a snowflake, whatever, right? Too bad, right?
Yeah.
We're all learning things about ourselves and how we learn well. And I think that's an improvement in society. And the fact that we're getting more content and very successful content out there that's teaching us things, it just goes to show like we just have to adjust with the times, and we have to, as we learn more about ourselves as individuals and a society, we need to start, yes, catering to ourselves and how we learn best, because we don't want to be in a literate society. We don't want to go backwards in terms of knowledge or understanding about the world. So, let's stop trying to like pretend like it's only good to learn by like staring at a textbook for 8 hours a day or something, right? Or like staying up all night, like taking notes meticulously on some subject. Like, watch YouTube videos. There's so much good stuff out there. Let's stop pretending like there's only one good way to learn.
Exactly. Yeah, as a father of 2 teenage girls, I definitely want to get through to them. I'm coming from a very selfish place, and my wife is in education. And so this is something we talk about constantly, is just how to get through to people. Is college even worthwhile, right? Like all things what we talked about, because college predominantly is still a book oriented. I mean, they may put the book in the PDF form and put on the iPad, but it's still the same forum or channel that you get through to that. So I'm totally interested in what you just said. And I don't know, we have to like dedicate more time to that, I think.
Let's pause the conversation for a word from sponsor G-Core CDN. G-Core CDN is a next-gen content delivery network that accelerates your application's static and dynamic traffic. It's got a global presence with more than 150 edge locations and 11,000 peering partners worldwide, and its entire infrastructure supports IPv6. G-Core can compress, resize, and convert images into AVIG or WebP on the fly. With dynamic content acceleration, websites are smoother and more responsive. G-Core CDN can protect your servers from overloads, be they unexpected traffic spikes or a DDoS attack. Your operations team will appreciate G-Core's extended API and its support for Terraform and Grafana, and your business team will appreciate the generous free plan, which includes 1 terabyte of monthly traffic and most key CDN features. Find out what G-Core CDN can do for your online presence at gcore.com/packetpushers. That's gcore.com/packetpushers. And now back to the conversation.
Well, I just went on and on about myself and my opinions right there. But what I meant to convey, Eric, is that I think like technical deep dives on YouTube, I think you could like network automation, pushing that on YouTube, and like maybe finding a way to animate it or have some kind of visual that makes it fun.
Yeah.
I think that could really, really do a lot for it, right? Because unfortunately, network automation is awesome. Anyone in network engineering knows that already. But the thing is, you unfortunately are at this, I think is a bit of a disadvantage in that you're sort of nested within network engineering. So you can't get away from network engineering. You're tied to it with network automation. And so we've already got this problem with people just being interested in network engineering in general. And then you want to attract them to network automation.
Very, very niche of a niche.
You have a challenge. But all of us do realize that network automation is like very important, necessary, like super cool. It's just that you have to get down that next level from network engineering. And so I think like YouTube deep dives and some interesting visuals could be really, really fun. It might actually get me more interested in coding.
Well, coming from a literature background as you have, right? I'll give you a hint and to the audience out there what I have in mind. So there's this subcategory on Amazon that's taking off, lit RPG. Literature plus RPG. Have you heard of it?
I haven't heard of it, but I have a feeling I know where it's going.
Yeah. So a bunch of them are in the form of a web novel or web serial where they, periodically, produce short chapters or long chapters online. And they literally just pretend you're in a RPG environment. Lexie just landed in this farm where, she looked around and there's nothing close to her, but she walked 10 steps toward that farmhouse. And now all of a sudden there's like, arm yourself with this armor, or like, you got to go kill this dragon, so to speak. So I think that is one potential avenue that you could get to people to make subjects fun. I mean, it's not like super fun, like Harry Potter fun or, the Hunger Games fun.
But it's more interesting. than staring at a book that's just telling you dusty facts. Yeah.
Yeah, precisely. That's what you're up against, right? Like, look at your next best alternative. It's like, yeah, I'll go with this like
Yeah.
silly little story.
I think that really would work. That's really cool. I hadn't seen that, but I am
Yeah.
not surprised at all that that's something that's taking off. It's just making things more interesting. And that's why, people like to hate on TikTok. And I get it. You can't deny that TikTok is very, very successful at showing people stuff, right? And it's
Right.
because, and I don't even do a lot of this stuff. There's other creators that are way more successful than I am at making network engineering cool. Shout out to Alexis and Kevin. They have editing styles and stuff where they put your hand in front of the camera and then pull it away and you're in a different place. They have
Right.
like hooks, visual hooks, or they have interesting questions at the beginning of the video. And those are all things that content creators do to try to capture your attention, make you watch the video for as long as possible, right? Which you might think is like, okay, that's devious or whatever, but it works. And if they're teaching you something, is that bad, right? Like, there's a lot of different things you can learn from visual mediums. And I don't know, we're just going in that direction. I don't know if it's good or bad or whatever. It just is, right? We're going in that direction. Like you said, fewer people are just like reading books,
Yep.
which is sad, but also does it mean we're not learning? Not necessarily.
Right.
So
you mentioned it perfectly. You got to adapt to the times. People evolve. And now that we have all these mediums that competing for our attention, then you just have to meet the audience where they are. And if they're at TikTok, on like YouTube Shorts, that's where you need to be. And you're competing for their attention on, I don't know, crazy doctor doing, science experiment.
Right.
So you have to, be able to at least be on par with the entertainment value of that. But I think another aspect is the sustainability, like I could go freaking write 10 more books, but if nobody reads it, then it's just basically I'm doing it on my own time, my own dime, and I couldn't produce a better content because I don't get paid for it. However, if it's something that I could actually break even, then it makes it more sustainable, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point as well. Like you have to take care of yourself as a creator too. And if something's not sustainable, it's not going to work regardless of how popular it is or not. So
yeah, it says 2 content creator right now that both have full-time jobs.
Yep. Having a full-time job while you're trying to do this that's one of the reasons I'm a terrible content creator. It's why I hesitate to call myself an influencer, but if that's what you consider it, I'm a really bad one because I can't take on sponsorships. I don't plan out my content very far in advance. Like I do a lot of stuff off the cuff. And I'm super flaky and don't answer my emails because I work really hard during the day and then I come home and I don't want to do any more work, So I'm sure you can relate.
I could totally relate. But, we talked about really interesting stuff. I'm just going to divide this episode into half and half. Now we're going to move into more serious stuff, I promise. So we talked about full-time jobs. So, and you mentioned you were a network integration engineer at Blue. And I'm wondering, there's certain things that you could say and there's certain things you cannot say. So feel free to just tell me to F off and say, well, Blue doesn't allow this, right?
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering, what are some of the unique challenges that you face? And for the record, Blue Origin is a big company and there are different divisions. And so you are in the team that actually puts networking gears on rockets in a fully, autonomous way, right?
Correct. Yeah.
If you're on the enterprise team, for example, right? Like you're still dealing with VLANs and MAC address and, what are some of the unique challenges?
Yeah, so I can only speak in general terms. You know this, but I'm mostly saying this for the audience. I can mostly only speak in general terms about the challenges of aerospace stuff and networking, just so you know. Unfortunately, NDA, ITAR stuff, I can't give you details about protocols or anything specific about the vehicle network. But with that said, let's see some of the challenges. We've talked about managing ego a bit, which sounds so unkind to my coworkers. I'm so sorry. That's not what I mean. Like, I'm not saying they're all egotistical jerks or something. They're all great.
I met some of them. They're very nice people.
Yeah, you have, right?
Yeah.
So maybe the best way to put it would be just integrating with other engineers, right? So that's maybe the biggest challenge I've had. Other challenges have been, learning from those engineers. I know that sounds kind of like the same answer, but there is a lot of electrical engineering, aerospace in general, engineering, mechanical engineering, radiation physics stuff that, I don't necessarily have to know it to be good at my job, but it definitely enhances my knowledge base and skills and understanding of what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So learning from them, I haven't done a lot of network engineering learning. I've learned a lot about some very specific protocols and technologies just because I've needed to be good at my job. But other than that, most of the learning that I've done has been not network engineering at all. And getting used to that was also pretty tough. Automation, right, is a big, big deal. I've never been a software person. I've tried, and I probably could try harder, I'll admit, but I've never been the network automation engineer, right? Just haven't. I understand that it's necessary and it's very good, and I'm not against it at all. I'm just so bad at programming.
Wait until somebody create better content.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
I'll be waiting for that
All
that
right.
RPG. I have had to learn still some programming to my despair. I've had to learn some programming. That's been really hard for me, kind of going out of my comfort zone constantly. That was my first year on the job. The most challenging was because I was always, 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 always outside my comfort zone, never within it. And even past that first year, I'd say at the 2-year mark, I was really actually comfortable finally with like, I am in my knowledge base now because I've spent the last 2 years understanding things. So anyway, to get back to automation, I'm sorry. We have automation going on everywhere, right? Because we're not stupid. Like lots of things have automation, not just the vehicle, right? We've got a ground network to deal with. We've got a big old lab with all our avionics in it. A lot of stuff is automated for testing. The rack that I built kind of from the ground up, there's automation in there. I didn't code it, but there's automation in there that I use every day. And then talking about the vehicle network itself, there is a kind of automation on it because if you think about it, this thing has to launch, it has to explode in a controlled way and then go up into space, and it has to deploy a payload or do whatever its mission is, and then it's got to come back down, right? Like our goal is to have a fully reusable rocket eventually, and we have a reusable stage 1 for our first few missions. We will at least have a reusable stage 1. And so if you think about that, that means that it has to go up and then come back down and not like explode on the ground when it comes back down. So that's going to happen in a controlled manner.
Yeah.
And there's safety critical traffic on this vehicle, which means that our SLAs are not in the order of milliseconds. It's really nano and microseconds, right? So a human brain just can't do that. We can't just sit there and command it through all of that. Once it launches, it's all automated, baby. That's all automation. I can't tell you what we're using to automate it or what is doing what, but like space vehicles have to be automated for the most part. We're not going to have humans on this thing for quite a while, I don't think. And even then we would have almost everything automated because it's just safer that way. So I had to learn about all of that, and I had to learn how to manage an integrated network that's going to allow that to happen. So it's kind of funny, you do a lot of, when we talk network automation, you're talking about automating the things that the network does, but really in a way on the vehicle, the network is allowing the automation to happen, if that makes any sense. That's probably as much as I can say.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I just look at it as the ultimate edge network, right? Like if we think of like a Tesla or any kind of self-autonomous thing, there's no way that they're going to backhaul all the decision back to the cloud, right? There's no central, location that they could backhaul to. If they could stand like an 8-minute latencies or whatever, just using Tesla, I think, most of us could relate to that if you have an object that the vehicle needs to determine whether they're going to hit that or not, like imagine that's your kid, that the vehicle has to make that correct decision within nanoseconds. And I think what you describe is the ultimate edge network where there's nothing that you could backhaul to. You have to make decisions. And that decision doesn't come from the network itself. Like you said, it comes from something making decision on the back end. Maybe, I don't know, we have to mention AI, I guess, by the bylaws for the last 2 years, like every single episode needs to mention machine learning and AI. So maybe, that's something that aids in the decision making.
Yeah, can't really speak to anything more specific. You're exactly right about all of that, right? Like people just can't make those decisions quickly enough. And honestly, not consistently enough either. Truly is just safer to have things autonomous on the vehicle. I wish I were more of a network automation engineer so I could give you more like honestly interesting stuff. But there's so much stuff that I work with that's layer 1, maybe layer 2, but there's so much layer 1 stuff that the automation is just what we're allowing to happen. And I know how it works because I have to, because it's on the network. But yeah, I mean, I don't write any of it.
No, that's okay. I mean, and I'm actually not just interested in the automation part, but rather just space networking in general, right? Because I mean,
Mhm.
in the heavy networking episode, you did talk about you do have like actual hardware, like on the vehicle, on the launch, vehicle or on space equipment, and radiation and power consumptions are both in security, all of that. So I think all of that are very interesting as far as you talked about when you're launching, you're not just like shaking the hardware, right?
It's exploding.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's literally exploding. Yes. And you've got these like crazy disparities in temperature. You've got
Hmm.
temperatures on both ends of the spectrum essentially, because you might have some network gear near a cryo tank, right? And you might have some near the engine. When the engines start, like that's hot, right? It's
Yeah,
exploding.
to say the least.
Right. So there's a lot of challenges that, we automate to overcome. But the first step in automating all of that is, we have to think through the steps of what it needs to do, right? Think about you're trying to automate something completely from scratch. None of the code exists, none of the hardware exists. You're starting from square one. So if you're designing a network to not only go to space, like go through the process of getting to space, which means exploding on a rocket that's boosting it up there, but also like being in space and doing things, you have to think about every tiny little thing. And in aerospace, it's really important, it's safety critical because it could result, if we do it wrong, it could result in lost lives and things like that. So we have so many actual like formal requirements that we have to not just write before we even order hardware or create it or write code. We have to write those requirements. And then we have to, once we do start writing the code and getting the hardware, we have to test to those requirement standards. And if they don't match, then we can't launch it, right? So there's a lot of challenges that we have to, design to address. Some of them are things like you mentioned, like radiation, right?
Hmm.
Ionizing radiation isn't really a thing on Earth because we're protected by the atmosphere, but it's a dangerous form of radiation because it can literally just physically change the makeup of a thing,
Hmm.
down to the, atomical level, whatever. So ionizing radiation on hardware usually causes like bit flips, right? It can
Hmm.
change values in memory, or it can change, literally over the wire or whatever you're using to carry your data. It can change the value of, for example, the voltage on a copper wire from a 1 to a 0. It is crazy. Yeah.
No reason at all. You're just like, hey, it's just part of life that, your one could be flipped to zero.
Right. And so, if enough of that happens, if you have enough radiation going on at once, then your data gets corrupted because the bits are all, mixed up, and it no longer
Corrupted,
makes
yeah.
any sense. Yeah. So you have to design a network that can address that. Usually with bit flips and radiation and stuff like that, usually it literally is the IT solution of turning it off and on again. You just reboot it. So like you might want to design your network equipment so that if it detects too many bit flips, too much corrupted data or whatever, reboot the thing and you should be good, right?
I'm glad what works on my home router also works in space.
Exactly. Yeah. So there is actual real science behind, turning it off and on again.
Yeah, exactly. I was in NOC too, so our NOC experience actually, plays well into the space.
Yeah. Did you try rebooting first?
Yeah, 15 seconds precisely. Did you wait
Yeah.
15? Yeah.
But if you think about it, all right, so for radiation, you want to reboot. But what's happening then to all the data while you're rebooting?
Yeah,
So you might want some redundancy in there, right?
there you
And
go.
it's up to you and your company and the design of the network and all that kind of stuff, and your mission, how much redundancy you think you need and what you will do to implement redundancy, right? There's a number of ways we can do that. And we all are familiar with those in data center networks. It's a very similar concept, right? On a vehicle. So like you have to sort of weigh the risk. If you add more hardware for redundancy, that means your rocket's going to be heavier, which is going to affect
That's right.
fuel and cost and all sorts of things. So like, how much of that are you willing to accept versus the risk of not being as redundant, right? Things like that. There's power requirements for all that stuff too. And so that also makes things heavier and more costly. Honestly, everything comes down to cost, just like designing a network on Earth. But you've also got temperature, you've got really, really hot temperatures, really, really cold temperatures. Stuff has to be resistant to that, or at least tolerant up to and down to certain temperatures. Normally, to do that, we have to get like aerospace graded components to make our stuff if we are making it, or we want to, if it's a COTS thing that we're getting off the shelf or whatever, we still have to harden it and physically harden it against these temperatures and then test it thoroughly to make sure that it doesn't, drop data or corrupt data, at these certain temperatures we've set in requirements. So there is just a ton of stuff you have to think about when you're designing this network when you start from scratch. And, that's where New Glenn came from. It was designed from scratch by a network architect 4, 5, 6, however many years later. Here I come, just implementing it all. So it's been a really interesting journey learning about all this stuff and all the decisions that went into making the network that I implement and maintain what it is.
Do you have access to the person who originally architected? Because I think that's ultimately the biggest problem, is that you're trying to solve problem that are not in the textbook. And that's something I learned from when I was at Azure, is just the biggest challenge is nobody have faced this kind of problem. So you have to design it almost out of your imagination. So almost like theoretical physics, right? Like nobody have seen this. So you just have to like reason your way out of it. I'm glad you said that you actually have access to the person, because I have a hard time believing he put everything down into documentation.
I am so extremely lucky that I have access to the guy who architected this whole thing. I'm very lucky, because not just because, historical context is very important in these situations, but also because he's an amazing network engineer. So yeah, luckily I can go back to him and be like, hey, why is it this way? I don't understand. This is hard. Why did she make it so hard? And he'll be like, well, there were a few options we went through, and like we thought, we weighed the risk of doing this versus not doing it, and we came to this decision, and then here's the document that shows it. It was pretty good about documentation too, so I got to say that he's unique in that way. Having historical context for that stuff has been very helpful, and that's what's, I think, ultimately helped me learn how to do my job as well as I can now, because I was very bad at it for a while until I learned historical context behind these decisions, and I could answer other people who were like, why did you do this? This is stupid. Like, well, here's the reason.
Yeah, that was exactly what they said, right? Like, this is stupid.
Honestly, yes, I've gotten that. And this comes back a little bit to when we talked earlier about like managing egos or whatever. It's like there are a lot of like software engineers, and sometimes you get electrical engineers who really, really think that they know networking, and that I shouldn't probably, I don't know, they probably don't think this, but they just don't seem to take me very seriously because they think they know network engineering already. And it's been interesting. So I've had people be like, why didn't you do this? Like, why didn't you use this technology? It doesn't make any sense to me. Why would you would use what you're using now? Because blah, 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 blah. And I've worked on this technology and it's better. And I've had to be like, okay, here's the decision ticket where they made the decision. Go read it. It wasn't me. Don't get mad at me. And then, explain why it works this way.
You're like, messenger.
I'm just the integrator. I just work here. Okay. I didn't make any of these decisions.
However, I do know what I'm talking about. I'm the SME. So, go read it and come back and ask nicely. Right. Yeah.
Now, I will say I've been lucky enough to I wouldn't say I've made design. Maybe you could say I've made design decisions about the network. It's not to the level of like, I did not architect anything for sure. I did not make any of these big decisions or like propose anything. But, I've been lucky enough to like get, I don't know if I call it design experience, just more experience making important enough decisions about this network and how it will work, that I've then had to later justify my choices to other engineers who are not network engineers. Some of it's gone well, some of it hasn't. And I've learned, especially in the situations where they've been like, well, that doesn't really make a lot of sense because now we're doing this and like it doesn't work. And I've had to be like, you're right. I shouldn't have done that. Right. And like go back on it and deal with the consequence. And it's been a good lessons for me, as annoying as it's been, to like why I should think about certain things when I make decisions that I didn't realize and stuff like that. So it's given me a little bit of, I don't know, a design-ish experience.
Yeah. Like new perspectives, probably.
For sure. And it's given me, the opportunity when you make these design decisions about a network, that you're creating from the ground up. Again, I didn't do this, but I understand there's business stuff behind it as well.
Right.
And so a good architect will also understand the business of the company they're working for and why, maybe this isn't like the cream of the crop, perfect, like, ASIC or whatever that you think that you should use. But that ASIC also costs like $5 billion. And maybe we don't want to pay that, right? Make our goal is to make space more accessible and cheaper, not super expensive. So maybe we don't use the ASIC that costs $5 billion. That's not an actual number. I just made up a crazy amount. But,
5 gazillion. Yeah.
Right. Like maybe we don't want to use like this technology might technically be quote unquote better to a lot
Right.
of people. But, to use that technology, you have to only buy, there's only one vendor on earth that makes that technology or makes the stuff that works with it. And it's like patented by them. So you can't, go to anyone else. And they
Right.
charge an arm and a leg for it. And maybe that's just not a good business decision for your company
Yeah.
because you want to make space more accessible and cheaper. So
Yeah.
you got to find a way to do it cheaper.
Yeah. I mean, come on now. Like, if the company is the only player in the game and they're only selling it to a handful of potential customers, right? Let's face it, how many people are building rockets or doing space exploration? We just had another company that gave up on it, right?
Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, like the bailout of the game. So now you have two. So of course they're going to try to recoup their costs by charging you arm and a leg. And your objective is, as rich as Mr. Bezos is. Yeah, not a lot of people like that.
He is a billionaire. Let's not tiptoe around it, right? Like he's got a lot of money and he's funding us, but the mission still stands. We're trying to
Right.
make it, your opinions on billionaires aside, I'm not even going to touch that, but like the mission of the company, Blue Origin, is to
Yep.
make access to space cheaper and more accessible for everybody. We want millions of people living and working in space. That's like what we say, right? So
Yep.
we consider our vision, our mission in every, network and vehicle that we design. I am proud of that, right? Because I agree with that mission. I think it is important to make it cheaper and more accessible to go to space. But there's these problems, right? Like I mentioned, like we were talking about the vendor. This is an aerospace problem right now, right? There's very few aerospace grade, hardware making vendors out there to choose from. So sometimes you do have to choose the very, very expensive components, and that kind of sucks, but that's how it is. And actually we've been sort of, this is not as representatives of Blue Origin or anything, but we've been sort of talking, our network team has been talking to different vendors kind of casually about like, how could we maybe get some cheaper parts from you? Like, would you ever consider, creating aerospace grade components for us
Right.
or other people who might want to put, maybe not us, but others, customers of ours might want to put payloads on our vehicles, and it would make it easier for them to do that if
Right.
they could buy network components that are aerospace grade, right? And would work with our stuff on the vehicle, because when you put a payload on, it's got to sometimes talk to the vehicle network, right?
Mhm.
So they have to be integratable. So we've talked to some vendors about that, and it's like a very cool thing that everybody's always interested in. But as a business decision, it's really hard to convince people to start doing this because there's only a few companies that might purchase stuff. So it wouldn't be like a huge moneymaker, and so we have to tell them like it'd be cool. We have to find a way to motivate other vendors besides the very expensive niche ones that are out there to like maybe start building parts for us and other companies to make space more accessible, right?
You're putting this picture in my mind where it's like the F1 car model where you just like the new Glenn. I mean, it's got enough outside, real estate to have put like 10 different logos on and be like, hey,
Yeah.
here's Arista, here's Cisco, here's Juniper, and Broadcom here.
I can't speak for Blue
Yeah,
and
yeah,
say I
yeah.
can't say what, but it's hilarious, right? Because like
Yeah.
that's something we've at least joked privately about is like, we can just throw their logo on, haha, and like maybe they would do it. We don't know, but we really do believe in this mission to make space more accessible for everybody, not just us, right?
Yep.
That's why we've made some decisions that we've made, and so I don't know. It's going to be space exploration and doing stuff up there is only going to increase in the future, and so networking protocols that have been developed for specifically for space, the design concepts behind making a network that's going to either go up in space or live in space for a long time, like all of that is just going to get more interesting and increase in popularity as time goes on. So it's worth following. NASA, I can't give any details about what we do, but NASA has released quite a few informational documents publicly about some of the technologies they've used, the design concepts, their stuff going back to like the 60s and 70s on what they did on like the earlier, Apollo missions and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's just been a lot of documents that NASA has released on their design stuff and everything that they've used for previous missions. And I think them and the ESA, I forget the name of the vehicle, but they've recently launched something that uses a technology called time-triggered Ethernet, which I think is so cool. I'm not like a SME on it or anything like that, but I think it's I know a little bit about it. It's very, very interesting technology. It's a different flavor of Ethernet, but it's designed for safety critical systems. And it's really cool. And it's worth looking into.
Well, at a high level, what is the biggest feature for this time trigger Ethernet?
It's basically like QoS at layer 2. So your safety critical stuff, you'd be reserving kind of bandwidth essentially for your safety critical layer 2 traffic. The point is determinism. That's another thing to
Hmm.
think about when you're designing a network to go up into space. It's usually considered safety critical, right? So
Right.
safety critical means essentially you want certain traffic that is necessary to keep the vehicle functioning properly has to get to its destination within a certain amount of time, right?
Yeah.
And it has to get there in a predictable manner. So to make things deterministic, sometimes you need to use protocols like time triggered to ensure that you know for sure, no matter what, your safety critical traffic is going to get there.
Oh, interesting. So it's almost like having a protective band in your radio frequency range that's just for like emergency vehicles. So they have the fast lane.
Yeah,
And regardless of what happens, you have that, like 40 megahertz or whatever to transmit your stuff.
exactly. That is a great example of a safety critical system. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and you already mentioned it because I was going to ask, like, where can people find more information? So I think you mentioned NASA, and does JPL do some of it too?
Oh yeah, JPL is involved. JPL, NASA. You can look up things like the Deep Space Network is another interesting one. That's not a vehicle network; it is literally Deep Space Network. But learning about how they designed some of that and how it works is very cool. Look up NASA and ESA, the European Space Agency. Look up the stuff that they have published. You can go to their website and like look around, right? Because they'll have documents that you can peruse about systems engineering and the concepts behind that, which also go into the way you design a network as well, even though it's not like a direct addressing network engineering. But look into the NASA Deep Space Network. Look into, if you just Google NASA networking, honestly, you will find a lot of stuff.
5,000 trillion
Right.
results, and you just pick like whatever is on page 1 and 2, and that's enough.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have anything specifically prepared. I should have done that. Just Google time triggered Ethernet. It's very interesting, right?
Absolutely. I'll put those in the show notes.
I've also made some videos
Hmm,
on it. If I could plug my TikTok a little bit.
that's perfect.
I've made a couple of videos about, just generally introducing the concept of time triggered Ethernet. And I've also made a few recently on like safety critical systems and what makes a network safety critical and what's important there. They're not super deep or technical. So if you just are curious about it in general, I think those would be good. You can just run on my TikTok page, see the thumbnails, they're labeled.
Yeah,
So
totally. We could just probably talk about this for another 2 hours, but we do have to keep track of time. So, besides the interesting videos, and we'll have these in the show notes, what are some of the other ways that people could follow you, connect with you? I know you're on live streaming on different channels. So yeah, tell us what's the easiest way to follow you, or I don't know, one of the ways.
So I'm most active, I'd say, on Twitter, second most active on TikTok. You can find me just Track It Pacer. That's the program packet tracer. Just swap the TR and the P and you'll get Track It Pacer.
When I first saw your handle, I was just like, okay, yeah, that's kind of funny. And no, it goes back to your English lit background, right? So like people usually fill in the blank and they see it. They don't even notice it, but they know instantly what it is.
Right.
Okay. So
Right.
Twitch and X or / Twitter, those were the two best ways.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok a lot. I post all my videos on TikTok, but I also post the same ones on Instagram. So I know a lot of people don't want to be on TikTok. That's totally cool. You can see the same stuff that I post on Instagram as well, if you prefer that.
IG, yeah. Insta.
I stream on Twitch, but it's not super regular. So follow me there if you'd like to just be notified. I'm starting up a little, for some reason, cybersecurity creators like me, and I've been kind of adopted, even though I don't do anything with cybersecurity. So I will play games every once in a while with cybersecurity creators there. And we're going to start like a little monthly thing where we stream things like Among Us and stuff like that. So if you want to just watch a bunch of goofy people play games.
Oh, I was curious about that. I saw that because that's one of my daughter's favorite games. I'm
It's
like,
fun.
okay, so she streams Among Us, and you also talk about like cybersecurity concepts, like while they're like, oh, you're dead, but hey, how'd you put this access list on your edge?
Yeah, oh my gosh. It's kind of funny, just really quick. I know we're wrapping up, but one of the funny things about like being a woman online is that there's just random men who hate you for existing.
Oh no.
It's fine. So some of the guys who hate me for existing will they've lumped me into, there's a lot of female cybersecurity like influencers
Right.
with a lot of followers. There was not a lot of them for network engineering. So I have just been sort of by default lumped into that group of like awesome, admittedly awesome women in cybersecurity, but I'm just not
Right.
cybersecurity at all. So I think it's very funny. But anyway, it's caused me to just like make friends with all these other cybersecurity folks. And so we play games every once in a while. So
Your tribe, we're being hated together. So we're like bonding.
yeah,
And...
it really is like trauma bonding. So
That's funny.
but no, they're great people too. So yeah.
I really appreciate you being here, Lexie. I had a great time either off camera chatting, on camera chatting. I have a feeling I'm going to invite you back just to be more specific, right? I really enjoyed our conversation. And
we sort of went off the rails here. It was so much fun though. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
yeah, that's all right. Hey, my show, my rules, right? So if I find it interesting, I'm sure there's one other person who find it interesting. Leave me a comment. Leave both of us a comment, right? Like which area you find most interesting on, we'll dive deeper into. So again, thanks for being here. I know this is unusual time for recording, but I appreciate you taking the time.
Anytime. Thank you so much for having me, Eric.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedback for Network Automation, this episode, or I guess Lexie? Send us some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/FU. We want to hear from you. Check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, and much more. I also want to let you know Network Automation Nerds will not be in Packet Pushers Fat Pipe stream starting July 2024. Crying face emoji. No, it's not a hiccup in the matrix. And I promise it's not because we have too much Python. It has to do more with the precise download tracking and episode sponsorship. So please smash that subscribe button on your favorite podcatcher to ensure future deliveries. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.